Welcome back to another episode of Make Planning Make Sense. I'm Aaron, and I'm a director at Centro Planning Consultancy. Today, Alex and I are speaking with Marco Tomasi, director at Formation Architects. This was a great episode because we really get into policy making. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what we can do differently. And I think that this is going to be a key theme as the public discussion turns more attention to the next London plan. We also discuss what might happen if policymaking, if decision-making, if plan-making became predictable and less speculative, and the effects that it might have on delivery, productivity, peace of mind, and the property market. In the current system, we have to be damn good at optimizing everything, and we are. And that's part of our value added. And the question, I suppose, for you, dear listener, is that if we were to be in the world that we're envisaging in this conversation, have planning agents negotiated themselves out of a job? Or would we be as essential as we are now, with the entire sector just getting more done? Let us know what you think. As always, you can find us on our socials, MP MS Podcast, on all platforms, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, and YouTube. And as always, you can write to us at podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Here is our conversation with Marco Tomasi. Marco Tomasi, director at Formation Architects. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We always like to start with a little bit of your background and how you came to your role.
I've been an architect for longer than I care to admit. I have been working at Formation Architects for about 20 years. Sounds a bit scary. And I started off as a Part 2 assistant and worked my way up. I now lead the pre-planning team at Formation Architects. Been living in London for about 20 years. Still liking it.
They say when you're tired of London, you're tired of life.
Yeah, I know that.
What you really want is just a little bit of space in Cornwall.
Yeah, perhaps. If you can actually get there. It's a bit of a nightmare.
I think that's part of the appeal, to be honest.
Yeah.
And you are very familiar with what could potentially make more sense in planning, what doesn't necessarily make sense in practice at the moment. You come with a really helpful comparative perspective based on your familiarity with different regimes.
Yes, I was working in Italy before moving to the UK, so I'm quite familiar to the system there. We also do quite a lot of work in India, we do work in France, we do work in the Middle East and Indonesia. I have to say the British planning system is quite special, especially seen from a continental point of view, which I have. It took me a while to love it. I have learned to appreciate its quirks. But
do you love it now?
I hate it less. No, I actually think there's a lot of good things about it, but it does drive me completely insane. And I think the idea of talking about it and trying to understand what could be done differently is a brilliant one.
Thank you.
Because it is quite dysfunctional at times, but I do think it has all the ingredients to change potentially. I think it's flexible enough to accommodate that level of change that it's absolutely required, because at the moment it's not delivering what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. How do you describe the UK planning system to people abroad?
On your second beer.
Yeah.
It's imagine all the rules that you're used to having and used to following, all the box ticking exercises that submitting a planning application is like. We haven't got any of those. And there's some guidance, but really every single time you have to start from scratch. And everyone's, what do you mean? What I mean is that when you buy a site, you have no certainty with respect to what you can get on it in terms of planning. So it's a bit more adventurous. There's more risk and perhaps more rewards. I guess that's the trade-off. There's a lot more uncertainty and it makes the planning process a lot longer. And we're all living with the consequences of that.
I think the temptation for greater reward is one of the things that is hard to shake when we talk about changing the planning system. But I would suggest that if greater reward were the frequent outcome, then we would have enough homes for the population. That said, part of our value added as agents is to look for these different opportunities to optimize the site through negotiation, through collaborative discussion, to really push the boundaries.
Yeah, I think where it comes a little bit unstuck is on relatively simple sites where you think there's no need to have this lengthy conversation.
Yeah.
You know, strategic sites, fine. Even in other countries, the most strategic areas will be subjected to a different level of scrutiny. But when you work in London, you sometimes find yourself looking at a small plot of land, which realistically has one or two possible outcomes in terms of urban form. And you spend a year and a half in planning, arguing, and you don't really understand why.
Yeah.
There's really no need. And in the meantime, we're delaying the delivery of housing.
Yeah. We're actually involved on a site together at the moment where you brought it to us and we're grateful, and you described it as, for our sins, and you described it as a really straightforward thing. And we looked at it and we're like, yeah, that is really straightforward. But it doesn't really ever work as designed. You still always end up with a certain amount or a certain series of delays because of the way that the process is structured. Even with good intentions, we've got good officers on that one. It's the nature of the system in a way.
I think you went straight to one of the main weaknesses. The system really relies on good people. If you have strict codes to follow, it's almost on autopilot. Yeah. But if everything has to be discussed all the time, you rely on good officers. We have a lot of good officers out there. There's probably not enough, and they're always overworked, and you never get enough attention, and you never get a response quickly enough. You really have to build that working relationship with them.
Walk us through what works well in a discretionary sense and what might not be working well in a discretionary sense.
I think in one of your previous podcasts, someone mentioned a cultural reluctance in Britain to put things down in writing.
Episode 3.
There we go. When you think about it, the idea that there's more flexibility and fewer rules must be a good one, right? It's very difficult to find one rule that fits everything. If you have more flexibility, you can adapt more quickly and get stuff done more effectively and efficiently. That involves a lot more work on a case by case. If you have guidance, it just leaves a door open for something different. And so whenever something departs from that, you have to test it again. And that is quite demanding. It's quite time consuming. It's quite costly. The amount of reports that we have to produce for any given application, it doesn't matter how small and how simple, it's staggering. Back home in Italy, if you are 10 meters from a neighbor's window, you're in the clear. And of course, we've got more sunshine in Italy. We can get a bit closer to each other. The whole idea of overlooking and privacy and all of that doesn't exist. You've got 10 meters. You've got less than 10 meters. It's not enough. You've got more than 10 meters. You can't complain. That's it. That's the rule. You're in the clear. Every time we have back-to-back housing development, the simplest form of terraces, there's always someone who objects to the neighbors being too close. It doesn't matter how far they are. Because at the moment they've got a field, you put a house 40 meters from their windows, it's too close. Yeah. And then, of course, there's guidance, and guidance is about 22 meters. One of my colleagues insists that the 22-meter comes from the nipple test.
I've heard this. Yeah. I've heard this, yeah.
And it's the distance at which you can't distinguish a nipple from the rest of the flame. Yeah. Now, I don't know where this legend comes from, but I've heard it so many times.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And I don't think it's particularly scientific.
You would hope that when you have design codes, there's a bit more rigorous research that goes into it than that. But it does take a lot of rigorous research to put design codes in place. If you're going to say, for sure, we need X distance or we need X code, right?
Yes, but I'll give you a reason why you wouldn't want to do it. Like sticking to the 10-meter distance. That stems from an obligation to be 5 meters from boundaries. Your neighbor is also 5 meters, 10 meters. That means you can never build up to the boundary. That means that you can never have a patio typology for a house, for instance. You always have to have your little house in front of your plot with a bit of grass around it, which is a huge limitation. Whereas here, in theory, you can have much more creative responses to difficult sites.
Yes, in theory, right? Is the way forward a discretionary system with just some clearer expectations up front? And then if you don't comply with these clearer expectations, then talk to us. It's discretionary.
Yeah, it seems like there's a common denominator with a lot of these developments. Do you have a base level of factors that you just think, that's going to be applicable everywhere, right? Or within this area, all of these factors are going to be roughly the same. We know what it's like to build a 4-story building. I see this with a lot of planning applications that we work on, and you think you can factor out a common denominator from this. Yeah. And then the rest is...
You don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time.
Yeah.
There is a fair amount of repetition. A lot of what we do is residential work, and a lot of the residential work we do isn't necessarily new typologies all the time. A lot of blocks of flats. It's not like every single corner of London is particularly unique. I always have these conversations with conservation officers, this conservation area. I remember we were having this conversation in Purley, and we were looking at a building which was locally listed, and it's this very special Edwardian parade. And I was like, okay, fine. And one day I'm on the bus on the North Circular, and I look out, and there is another parade in North London, completely identical.
Yeah.
And then I spotted another one in Clapton. And then I spotted another one. So there are at least 4 around London. I did a little bit of research, and they were all built at the same time in very different parts of London. They were developed at the same time. And they are part of what makes that conservation area so special.
It's part of what makes it nice, right? But when we start thinking about it in terms of that element being something that makes it special, it forgets the fact that Victorian terraces look like Victorian terraces up and down the island.
Yeah.
And they look like Victorian terraces in the United States. It's all the same. And so when we look at the fact that we actually have an ocean of data, because everything has been tested case by case, site by site, application by application, we do know within a certain limit, it should be fine. Or we know that it won't be fine, but we also know that we can't really expect something different, right? Thinking about lower floor residential units in a tall building within a tall building zone. We know that they're not going to do well for daylight sunlight. So why don't we just sort of understand what the general parameters are? We're not making the policy here like on the spot. The daylight sunlight thing came up actually in a conversation we were having earlier about being one of those issues that you could just get up on its feet.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite a technical thing. You could simplify a lot of these things. If you look at the building regs, there's a general principle, which is guidance. It's actually compulsory to comply with this general principle. Then how you do it can be done in different ways. And the approved documents show you one way of doing it. And if you follow that, it's a tick. Or you could demonstrate how you can do it differently. In principle, that sounds great. But then you have the British standards added on top. And it's okay, but what wins? I've got the approved document, and then it refers to the British standard. You go and look at the British standards, then there's like different versions of it. One is draft under consultations, but actually it is a material consideration because it's coming forward. And it's a bit like Russian dolls. And there's always one inside the other.
How would you view what I understand they do in some continental regulatory systems where the window surface area is at a minimum ratio to the floor space of the room?
Yeah, back home in Italy, I think it's 1/8 of the area of the room. 8 square meter room, you need a 1 square meter window. I mean, it's, you just have to comply with that rule. If you don't comply, you can't do it. Daylight sunlight is important. I think everyone can agree with that. I think there are some quirks to the BRE guidance that, frankly, I don't agree with, like the highest requirement for the kitchen. If the kitchen was the dark corner of the flat and you turn the lights on when you use it, I think that would be perfectly fine. I don't think we spend that long in kitchens. I think there is a bit of a romantic idea that someone stays there cooking for 2 hours every day, looking out of the window.
Yeah, it's all very heteronormative.
Yeah, a little bit of that as well. Yeah, personally, I use the microwave a lot.
Did you know that the UK is the largest per capita consumer of ready meals?
Oh, it doesn't surprise me. You need really good lighting in your kitchen to warm up a ready meal from Marks & Spencer.
This is not just a kitchen, it's an M&S kitchen, which means it has a microwave. Yeah. So you're right, there is a romantic idea to some of these things. There's also a nuclear family orientated presumption in that being a favorable typology.
Yeah.
I live in a 1-bed flat. That does not make me more transient than people who live in a 3-bed flat, for example. And so there are certain sort of unspoken assumptions about what constitutes a healthy community or a healthy neighborhood that I think do subconsciously bleed into standards that are applied with less flexibility than they should be.
Yeah.
I think a mixed sort of typology in terms of units is a good thing.
Yeah, but also there are some paradoxical situations where you have to deliver 40% family units in a flatted scheme in an area where there's a lot of family homes and terraced housing.
Occupied by 3 or 4 professionals who can't afford their own little place.
Correct. And obviously no family will want to buy a flat in that development. They will want to buy a house. They might just move further afield because they want a house, because that's what they aspire to.
I'm reminded actually of what Peter Murray was saying about the fact that the planning system is based on the common law system. I understand why he said that about planning. And I think that's all well and good if design and slow evolution were the key principles of it. But what is not delivering is delivery. We are not building enough homes. And I like the common law system and the discretion. And I think that's an important thing to preserve, but not at the expense of making sure that the needs of society are met. Discuss.
I agree. I think at least for the majority of sites, we should have some clearer rules that you just follow and no questions asked. I always tell everyone in the office, I don't understand why we just don't have a blanket rule that anywhere in London you can build up to 4 stories. No questions asked.
Just put a floor on it.
Just 4 stories. I'm not saying 10. I'm just saying 4 stories. Even if you have a little bungalow and someone builds a 4-story townhouse next to you, is that really going to destroy your way of life? I don't think so.
The issues and options type paper that the GLA circulated recently in advance of the new draft London plan coming forward floated this idea, should we set an in principle acceptable height in areas of good connectivity, right? So if your PTAL is, say, 4, then 6 stories is acceptable in principle outside conservation areas and within 50 meters of a listed structure.
Yeah.
Looking where there are genuine hurdles, practitioners can really come up with a list pretty quickly. Figuring out a way to remove those, even if we don't have complete control over the building height on any particular site, would really help move things along, I think. And as far as unintended consequences might go, for me, again, it's about delivery. I would rather have some unintended consequences that we can reflect on and refine the process as we go. Without that kind of floor, for everything being case by case, for everything being, well, no, I don't want to do it that way because then there might be a negative externality. I kind of want to call that bluff.
Yeah,
Discuss.
Sometimes there are actually some clearer elements of guidance in the local plan, like site allocations, for instance. Site allocations is almost as close as we get to zoning. So the local authority have decided that these sites should be used for such and such. And we spend a lot of time in planning arguing that it should be something else. On one hand, we're advocating more direction and some stricter rules. And on the other hand, the moment we get some stricter rules, we're doing the opposite as well, where we have an allocation for housing and we want to put some mixed use that the local authority hadn't really envisaged. And I think it's a really good idea, incidentally, but we have to go through a lot of hoops to demonstrate that it's good, because in their head, it had to deliver X, and we're not doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's where that putting a floor in while retaining a discretionary system could come in handy. Because for every site that is allocated where the applicant comes forward and says, I want to do something totally different, there's probably 100 sites that could just be up on their feet and underway if there was an in-principle acceptability for a certain typology.
I think one of the elements of the system that I really struggle with is this idea that design is always used as an excuse and a delay tactic. We are designing something that the local authority think is too dense, and they might say it's too dense, but then for the remaining 15 pre-apps, they keep saying we're not convinced by the design. I don't think it's in keeping with the area. We think it should be more sympathetic. It should respect this and that. Actually, it's just an excuse. It's nothing to do with the shape of the windows. You have an in-principle objection to the height or to the use. You had a different vision for the site. And because there isn't really any strict rules, using design as a tactic.
I think that's a really big catch-22 that I've experienced as well, because you have a situation where they say, we can't design the scheme for you. That's not our job. And we are going to tell you, in principle, we think that capacity is possible at the site. This number of units is possible at the site, but you need to show us that you can achieve that in terms of design. You can show us a design that convinces us that number is possible. And then you show them a design and they say, you haven't really convinced us yet that capacity is possible. And then you show them another design and they say, oh, actually, we're still not convinced. And then they finally say, do you know what? Actually, we don't think that capacity is possible at the site.
And they drag the conversation into the realm of subjectivity. There's no way out of it. You keep saying the same things for a year and a half. Eventually, you appeal for non-determination. The system is so inefficient and fails to deliver housing or development. We find that over and over.
We will be right back. I want to circle back to this idea of whether a proposal always ought to be in keeping with the local design, because it shouldn't. Because we're out of land inside the green belt and we're so far behind on housing. Whatever solution that we end up finding, for London at least, but also, frankly, for greenfield extensions, we're going to have to appreciate that the landscape will be impacted. The prevailing local design of the area as it exists now needs to change, ought to change.
Yeah, 100%. You can't solve a problem by keep doing the same things that kind of led to having that problem, right? So you've got to change something. I am a strong advocate of juxtaposition of different things and creating interesting public realms. I think there's no point in replicating what's there. There are clearly areas of particular historical interest, conservation areas where one has to be careful and sympathetic. No one's saying that we shouldn't be. There are areas where there should be a lot more freedom and you should be able to do something that actually changes radically because change is needed.
Yeah.
I think that character point is definitely well-meaning. I think it's important to understand the character of a place,
Agreed.
even when it looks terrible.
Agreed.
We have done lots of projects in areas where I understand the character, it's rubbish. And, I want to change it. But you need to go through that process. It might look terrible to me, it might look terrible to you, but it might mean something different to people who live there.
I love this point because it goes up against my sort of pet peeve about the term placemaking and the idea that we're makers of place. I think that lacks a humility. People make places.
Yeah.
You can have an absolutely busted townscape that's falling apart, and that could actually be the warmest and most vibrant community in a city. The placemaking is not exclusively a design concept, and we are not makers of place. We are facilitators of the making of place.
You can design the best building, but if it's not used in a way that brings it to life, it will not work. The same with the public realm. There's a lot of attention to the activation and the right mix in terms of retail, if there is any retail. We spend a lot of time talking about that. There's not a huge amount of empirical evidence that architects really work on when doing this. Architecture is a discipline that lacks that empirical evidence almost always. You'll hear a lot of architects saying, oh, I've created this space, I've designed this space so that people can do this and feel and behave like that. It's slowly changing because now we have different ways of monitoring the way buildings are used, for instance, and we cannot control, but we can assess the way people move around buildings a lot more easily, and hopefully it will influence the way we design buildings. For a long time, architects were designing buildings not really considering the way people would use them, just assuming that people will use them in a certain way.
Yeah. We should be able to consider how these places will be experienced at different times of day by different users. That is an important part of a design-led process, in my view. But what might be missing is that modicum of grace to also understand that places will be used in unintended ways, and that is neither something that we can or should want to control at the planning stage.
Yeah. Also, you might miss some features of an area if you don't live there. You don't understand the subtleties of what people enjoy doing in that space. You might actually end up designing the wrong thing, which could be a wonderful design, but maybe it's not wrong, but it doesn't harness the full potential of that place.
Those sort of disjointed little patches of grass in a modernist housing estate, I think, fit that kind of bill. To bring it into the 21st century, on-site children's play space just is not used that way. I'm thinking of the development in which I live. There is on-site children's play space, and you can tell it is for the 0 to 5s on this terrace. We call it the Champagne Terrace because there's no kids. It catches a little bit of afternoon sun, but it could have been a flat. And there's already tons of great play space downstairs where all the 5-year-olds are. They're with the 6 to 11 and the 12 to 17-year-olds all downstairs with their families because there's a vibrant space around them.
Yeah, this goes back to what we were saying earlier. This is one of the few fixed rules that we've got, right? The amount of play space. So that's something that simplifies the system. You've got X number of flats, 20% are this tenure, 30% of that tenure. That spits out your child yield.
This is a really important point because Those kinds of policies demonstrate that it is possible to put a floor on these things. And they also demonstrate the fact that it's not a good idea to do that for every element of a proposal. We're probably being too flexible about the things that we should be less flexible about. We're probably being less flexible about the things that we need to be more flexible about. I would say there definitely are policies that are well suited and tailored for their purposes. But if we're having such a long conversation about building height through multiple pre-apps, and then we get to the play space and it's like you need X number of square meters for 0 to 5-year-olds, where is that going to go? We're regimenting the wrong things in that case, and it can actually be reversed.
I think that the child play space is another thing that is used as a symptom of overdevelopment, right? So it's almost saying your building is too big because there's not enough child play space.
It's also a massing thing, isn't it?
So, yeah, of course, I don't have a problem in principle with your 40-story tower. I like the idea. However, I think it's too dense because there's no space for child play space.
There's not 400 square meters of children's play space is the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or there's too much pressure on the ground floor because we can't accommodate the 1,500 bicycle stands that we need with 3.5 meters between bike stands. I'm a cyclist. I cycle around London. I think cycle spaces are really important in development. I think ideally we would see more people on bikes. When we had the strikes, it was a bit mad, but it was great that everyone was cycling around, and I think that's the way forward.
Same season, agreed.
But at the same time, the cycle stores that we are designing underused. There's a lot of evidence that they are not fully used. They're too big. There's too many spaces. Yeah. And there could be a flat in there or two. And whoever wrote the guidance for the bike space standards, the space in between racks, got it a little bit wrong.
What do we think about other codes? Just spitballing here, UGF, discuss, that's a code, 0.4.
Why aren't we just contributing more to on-street trees?
I don't have necessarily a problem with UGF.
It's one of those magic things that eventually you plant a couple of trees and you get a bit of greenery here. Maybe 15 years ago, landscape was more of an afterthought.
Yeah.
And now it comes forward a lot sooner in the design process. And I think that's a good thing. I also think we tend to over-design landscaping in communal spaces, in blocks of flats. If you go up to Hampstead, there's lots of beautiful buildings from the 30s that are collective housing, blocks of flats. The landscaping is just grass and some mature trees.
Yeah.
All it is.
We were involved in the conversion of a positive contributor to a conservation area. Part of that was going to introduce a roof terrace. You need a landscaping plan and a landscape design statement and a landscape management plan, therefore, in the application. And I spoke to a landscape architect, and I think I pissed them right off because I said, it's just planters on a communal terrace. Let's just get it up on its feet. We don't do anything off the shelf. My bad, but also it's just a roof terrace for some flats.
Look, as a designer, I'm feeling compelled to say that every project is an opportunity for an amazing design, and we shouldn't take anything that's like standard but.
Thank you. Okay, thank God that ended with a but. Yeah, go on.
Sometimes it is unnecessary to complicate things.
The question is, I think, that you should have in mind, it's like, at what cost? And what's the cost of that on aggregate?
And more often than not, on buildings that have brick cladding, it's like, just pick a nice brick. Just pick a nice brick. That's 90% of the building.
Yeah.
And let's not discuss the benches outside until we're blue in the face. And if we actually focus on the things that matter, I think the building has a better chance of being of good quality.
Yeah.
Because we can't get everything of the highest quality.
Yeah. And it could potentially become viable to deliver, and it will be delivered, if at all, like a year sooner.
Yeah, that would be a plus.
Yeah.
That would be a plus. So we could actually see it rather than just draw it.
We were talking before, Marco, about whether we're negotiating ourselves out of jobs with this. But I do believe that it would not by any means be negotiating ourselves into obsolescence. I think that it would just let us deliver more.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of spending 2 years on one project, we would spend 6 months on one project and the next 6 months on a different project. So we would do 2 projects in a year rather than just one. We would be equally busy, but just doing more and delivering more, which is ultimately what we all want to do.
Can I add one more to the design code speed round? Yeah. Private amenity space, 5 square meters, 1.5 minimum depth. Discuss.
We discuss this a lot in the office. There are different schools of thought. with respect to the importance of having some external amenity space associated with every flat. I am in the, yes, it's a good idea camp, but it's true that for a lot of people that really isn't so important, and they'd rather have additional internal space. Providing choice is good. So having products that cater to different sensitivities and habits is a good thing. I would not want to live in a flat without an external amenity space. That is a personal thing. And I come to the conclusion that it shouldn't really be taken as the gospel. It's just the way I feel about it.
I want to ask you, Marco, as an architect, your design process, having worked in Italy, the UK, 2 different systems, planning context, guidance-based planning context, how does each of those shape the design process for you as an architect?
You would think that if you have lots of rules, your design is more constrained. You would think that leads to more uniformity and all buildings looking the same because, there's a book sitting somewhere in City Hall that tells you everything you have to do. My experience is the opposite. Those rules generally stop at a very clear point. They stop short of telling you what the building actually needs to look like. And this is working in Italy, where you don't have to spend a lot of time arguing how tall should a building be, how many units should this plot deliver, because that's already been decided. And you can actually design the building. And you can actually spend a lot of time thinking about the shape of the window. I'm just being very simplistic.
You can actually put your energy toward that.
Exactly, because you don't have 3 years to do these things. You have a short period of time, but you focus on those things that you actually want to do. Not that we don't do it here, we have to do it as well, but then we have to endlessly discuss all of these points with the local authorities. I think it's almost invariably the case that we tend to, not just us, but a lot of people tend to adopt almost standardized responses to design questions because that worked before and it's quite painful to try something else. There's more uniformity in the design response in a place where there is no design guidance, which is an interesting paradox. It's just that this idea that the system is very nimble and very flexible doesn't necessarily translate in more experimentation.
It's not nimble.
It doesn't.
It wants to be.
It claims to be.
It sure does.
But
would you draw any sort of connection with that guidance-based context that we have here and the style of architecture that we've produced in London? And I'm gonna...
He's gonna say
Is he gonna say it? Yeah. You say it. Okay.
No, I'm too excited.
New London vernacular. Does that term resonate with you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with what you mean by it. And I think I was thinking about it from a very kind of architect's point of view. One day I was walking around London and I always look up. It's quite a dangerous thing for me to walk around London because I'm always looking at buildings, even when I cycle. I was thinking Victorian architects created all of this and there's a certain consistency to it and it's very recognizable. And they were like, designers, whoever designed those buildings. There's a lot of beauty to it and some consistency. It's like there's some pride in it. And then I'm thinking, I think at this particular point in time, we're actually doing something similar. I think there is a body of buildings that have that kind of critical mass and communality of purpose.
Yeah.
And you can call it the New London vernacular. You can call it the only thing we can afford to build because it's standardized enough and doesn't catch fire. Well, call it what you want. I will embrace strict rules with regards to density and distance from boundaries. But when it comes to design, I want to be left alone.
Paul Higgs was making this point. Some of the most beloved housing in this country, in fact, nearly all of the beloved housing in this country was built before the Planning Acts. And you have to just figure out how to control for the worst.
That kind of takes us to the question, why is that all the old stuff is so amazing and all the new stuff is so terrible?
I wouldn't say the new stuff
but which is an architect, I've been asked so many times. Yeah. So you're like, you're an architect, but why is that all modern building are rubbish and all the old buildings are so amazing? I think it's very unfair. But I always say, look, of all the old buildings, only the good ones have survived. all the rubbish that was like built like really poorly largely has disappeared.
Yeah.
Like the slums have disappeared. So you're comparing the best stuff from the past with everything.
And I think it's fair to point out that the estates near our offices in Clerkenwell are good examples that some of the stuff that now does need to be refurbished or demolished and replaced did come after the Planning Acts. So it's not strictly a now versus then thing. Even with the Planning Acts, buildings are aging out of their useful life. Estate regen in Olive Zone 2 is exactly to this point. It's not a question of taste to my mind. It's a question of controlling for the worst, but also accepting with grace that the next decision we make for a site will not be that site in eternity. There is a process of renewal that is actually a really helpful and important part of a healthy city.
Yeah, we should accept the position that if it stops working, we'll demolish it and do something else.
Yeah.
That's the way it's always been. And I don't see why not.
I agree. Our architecture and planning responds to the challenges of the day. I think we face new challenges today as well. It was about reconstruction post-war. We face new challenges, climate change, housing crisis, so many things that perhaps we weren't facing before.
I moved to London in 2007 and been here ever since. And actually, I sometimes play a game, especially the area where I live, which is not too far from here, walking around and identifying all the buildings that weren't there. There's a lot of stuff that's happened, and not all of it is amazing. But generally, there's more density, there's more people, there's more activation. It's a more successful neighborhood. People want to live in London for a number of reasons. The fact that it's a beautiful city is one of them. We have to keep that tradition and kind of add to it in a positive way.
Yeah.
It's not just the highest amount of flats at the quickest possible rate. That's not acceptable.
Exactly. And I guess the sweet spot is where we can recognize that they don't come at the expense of the other.
It's completely feasible.
In terms of a model that we can hold up as a really positive example, Tower Hamlets is doing great.
And all of this despite the dysfunctional planning system.
All of this despite the dysfunctional planning system. We were talking with Peter Murray as well about Barking and Dagenham and Be First. They have the same statutory foundations in their planning system as less sort of forward-facing LPA. Where I get stuck is that we can't control whether that person in that authority is going to be vision-led and clear-eyed and outcome-driven. That's the eternal pickle of the planning system. If everybody's in it working toward the same goals, it produces great results, and it's collaborative and it's positive. But we also know we can't just rely on that as the intention of it and say, well, that's how it's designed to work, because we know that's often how it doesn't work. How do we fix that?
Do we have?
No, fair. They're big questions.
Yeah.
I wish we had answers for you today, dear listener, but
I know quite a few people that work in local authorities, and I have to say they are really driven to improve the public realm. That's why they joined the local authorities. They didn't do it for the money.
No.
So they really want to make a difference as officers. They really want to contribute to that transformation.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of good people that really want to do that.
Absolutely.
Architects get so attached to our projects. We will do everything in our power to deliver the best possible building. And it doesn't matter if we spend 3 times as long as we should. We'll always do it. And our clients know that. I don't think it's the drive to deliver outstanding building and spaces that is lacking. I think sometimes it really is difficult because the system seems designed to put hurdles in your way. And you think, why are we talking about these things when we could actually be doing a lot more?
If you grant the premise that we're all well-intended people in this profession because we care about the outcomes of it, then I think you're halfway to actually looking at what can and what needs to change.
And officers are like-minded people. There's usually good communication. We understand each other, come from a similar background. After that whole process, you get a recommendation for approval. And then it goes to planning committee.
The wildcard gauntlet, I call it.
I mean, it's an amazing idea that every single application has to be determined by politicians.
It's like a lot of parts of the planning system where you say, I see why it was designed that way.
And they obviously see the world in a different way. They see every scheme, every project as a political piece of the puzzle. They care about things that are not necessarily design matters. Therefore, you are in this position where you don't really know which way it's going to go. and for us, it's puzzling. It's an incredible position to be in. You've got so much time and resources invested in a project, and you've done everything right. You've engaged with stakeholders, hired a cracking design team, negotiated a scheme for 2 years with the local authorities, and you get in front of the planning committee. There's 3 independent councillors who are just there for the sole purpose of saying no to every single application because they are voicing the concerns or positions of a specific part of the population. And you think that's democracy in action. But it really does make it difficult to deliver housing, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. But you had an interesting point as well about why it feels uncomfortable to propose removing that step in the current system.
Yeah, there aren't enough fixes in that system, right? When we were talking about it, we were talking about a hypothetical site where I managed to persuade planners that I can put a 50-story tower, and nothing really is there in the local plan to say yes or no to it. I just spotted an opportunity and argued my design. But that is a massive change that isn't really accounted for in any local plan. No one was imagining that would happen. So I can see that you have to support that. We have to get a stamp of approval onto that.
Because we don't trust what the councillors are going to think in this system, speaking generally, but they don't trust what's going to come at them through the discretionary planning system either, which is understandable because wildcards are very possible.
Yeah, therefore there needs to be that level of scrutiny. I'm not suggesting the planning committee isn't the correct response to that. I'm just saying it adds such level of uncertainty that it just makes the system so unpredictable towards the end of it when a huge amount of time has been invested.
Ollie Sargent at Cartwright suggested that the committee structure makes sense when something clearly doesn't accord with the development plan. And so I think reining in the frequency of things needing to go to committee, and I'm not talking about what's in the planning and infrastructure bill because that's all like small fry stuff anyway. But if the planning system had greater structure, it would relieve some of that anxiety about that final test being necessary.
Yeah.
And it goes again to the importance of public engagement in the plan making process.
So I think we're saying let's set up a few more rules. If we follow those rules, then for certain projects, we don't have to necessarily check with the politicians every single time. We can get through on delegated powers and speed up the process because ultimately there's only so much you can depart from the general principles.
And you're welcome to depart from the general principles, but it's at your own risk, understanding then that there will be a committee gauntlet at the end. If it goes outside of the development plan expectations to a certain degree or on certain issues, then it would be recognized that's on the applicant's risk.
I think it all sounds quite good. I wonder, in reality, how many schemes would actually choose not to depart substantially for greater gain.
We're in such a speculative system at the moment. It's tempting to think that would always be the case or too often be the case. We're also so familiar with a highly speculative land market, a highly speculative planning regime, a highly unpredictable local political context that I'm not hearing a reason not to rein it in this way.
We just got a Gateway 2 approval for student housing in West London, which is the first Gateway 2 approval.
Congratulations.
Thank you. For a modular system tall building. It's 23 stories. And that was a great result. A lot of our clients are saying, no, we were not even trying to get beyond 6 stories. We could, but we're staying below because otherwise we have to get Gateway 2 and that's just too much risk.
Yeah.
So there are people choosing deliberately to keep the level of development lower to not engage with that system. What we are saying, it could look like that potentially, where committee becomes this kind of beast that is completely unpredictable because it only deals with the slightly more audacious schemes. And a lot of people decide that it's not worth the extra time.
Absolutely. I think there's a market for that.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of developers out there that focus on sites with planning permission already. On PD, they choose to do schemes that are under 10 units to be below the affordable housing threshold. The moment you start doing the streamline route, though, you take away the opportunity to capture value because you're conforming to what we've agreed. So I think the British system is in a way addicted to this. If you want to do anything, then what can you give us in return in terms of value capture?
Yeah, it is a little bit addicted to this idea that you need to do something, you need to come up with something that, is more than what another developer would have done. Because you have to add some value, right?
And we're damn good at that as agents, to always be looking for ways to better optimize the site, right? That's part of our value added.
But that's mostly what we do day in, day out. It's the first step of every project. This is a site, I've got this site, what can we do with it? Where can we find ways of squeezing more out of it?
The very first step is challenging the brief and saying, well, actually, have you considered that or this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that a predictable model could still allow for that.
Yeah, I agree.
So you can actually focus on the value that we're adding, which doesn't need to be so much constant chasing or being chased on the LPA's side.
And also doing it more quickly is value.
Say it again. Say it again.
Time is money. If you deliver something 2 years earlier, that is added value.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to stop. Marco Tomasi of Formation Architects, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Make Planning Make Sense. Please do give the show a follow and please share the show to keep the conversation going and the community growing. Find us on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky at MPMS Podcast, or write to us at podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Make Planning Make Sense is presented by Centro Planning Consultancy and recorded in beautiful London, England. Its executive producer is me, Aaron Zimmerman. Additional production by my colleague and co-host, Alex Roth. Marketing and promotion by our colleague, Reese Raymond. Graphic design by our colleague, Mariam Malaxi. Music by Joseph McDade. From all of us here at Centro, thanks again for listening.